You're a busy professional. You don't have time for fluff. You need strategies that work, and you need them fast.
I aspire to inspire before I expire. And for me, that's how I return to what I get gratification out of in life, what life means to me, what being successful means to me.
Hello, and in today's episode, I am joined by Aimee Lamb. Now, she is a physician assistant, educator, global health practitioner, and end-of-life doula who has worked across healthcare systems in the United States, the UK, and further afield. And in this conversation, Aimee shares honest insights into why so many healthcare professionals and busy professionals more broadly experience stress and burnout, not just from workload, but from misaligned expectations, constant pressure, and a lack of space for reflection. And we talk about type A personalities, the idea of refilling what she calls the soul bucket, the impact of digital distraction on modern life, and what really matters when we step back and look at our lives more honestly. So this is a reflective, wide-ranging conversation about meaning, limits, and choosing work and life with intention. I'll see you on the other side. Aimee, it's such a privilege to have you on the pod. I have been looking forward to this conversation because, having spoken to you before, I note that you bring such a unique mix of experience and honesty to topics that matter to so many of us. So thank you for joining me today, Aimee. How are you?
Well, thank you so very much for having me. And I'm doing very well. Thank you.
Good stuff. Well, the first thing that I'd like to remark on is the fact that you've worked in healthcare systems in both the US and the UK and beyond, I believe. So what do most people misunderstand about how healthcare really works and how that affects stress and burnout?
I think that we all go into healthcare, whether it's in the United States, whether it's in the UK, and I suspect elsewhere, that we go into it with expectations of ourselves, our moral compass, what we are going to do to help people and how we're going to change the world from, our little place in the universe. And I think that oftentimes we have unreasonable expectations of what we can actually accomplish within the confines of any healthcare system. And for example, medical doctor training is adversarial. Patients, and it's just the nature of the beast. You have someone who is, let's say, taking call where they're on, overnight. And it is the patients who rob us of our rest, of our meals, of our family time, of our sheer capacities. And I think however a healthcare system is executed, modern medicine, we have evolved into such a beast that the expectations outweigh the deliverables. And I think that causes an extraordinary amount of stress on any, I'll say, idealistic provider, a provider who went in with their heart and soul to help. And I think that dichotomy between the infrastructure of expectation and what we go into it with, it's can be an extraordinary mismatch.
Yeah, of course. On that very point, you mentioned the words, it's medical training. They go through that and they become quite adversarial because obviously patients might be taking up too much of their time and also their training. I think you alluded to this before when I spoke to you. Is it fair to say there's a kind of disillusionment as a result of going into the industry and realizing that they can't possibly deliver at the high levels that they were originally expecting to do? Does that disillusionment somehow filter over into their careers on a day-to-day basis and then make them feel obviously dejected or demoralized as a result? Have you noticed that?
I think that's a very accurate picture to paint. I think that, and the reality is, as a child, as a teenager, as you're growing up, you have expectations that probably are not realistic. But in the realm of healthcare, the expectation is we are going to see a patient and treat a patient and help a patient. And the barriers have to do with time, a finite amount of time, not enough time, see more patients in less time. This is not the old fashioned grab the doctor bag and go sit and have a cup of tea and talk about, what's ailing you.
Yeah.
And part of that is, medicine has evolved from a hands-on art of communication and laying hands on to one built of an electronic and a diagnostic and a pattern of invisible findings that sometimes stands in the way of actually seeing the patient. And we all go into medicine because of the relationship we develop with patients, the ability to give what we have to give to help them heal and get better. And the industry is not necessarily designed for us to evoke those
Mm.
feelings. It's always against time or schedule. It's much more adversarial, I think, than medicine used to be. So it's much more stressful.
Yeah, of course. I mean, obviously during my lifetime and your lifetime, you would have seen that, you would have witnessed that transition to the point that we've got to, because I recall as a child, the local doctor would come around, as you say, with his briefcase and be there. And it was a really personalized experience of having somebody come around, or we would go to the local clinic and you would be seen. And it just seemed that there wasn't a question of in, out of the door as quickly as possible. You had more time, and it seemed that their jobs felt that they were individualizing the care. That change, that shift has obviously happened over the years. And as you say, you've explained it really, the reasons for that well, and in a clear fashion. So I get what you're saying exactly. So that's interesting. And just moving on, because obviously there's quite a few things to cover here. There's a question that I have. It's about type A personalities. Now, type A people are obviously the ones that are driven, the high achievers who want to do as much as they possibly can and have as much success as possible. But in their case, sometimes they forget to rest, and therefore they never stop long enough to refill their soul bucket. And this is a word that you used when I briefly chatted to you before. What does refilling the soul bucket look like in your world?
The soul bucket, it's intimating from a children's book. And for me, I think that, part of our burnout and stress is our disconnect from ourselves. We just become engines of accomplishment, lists and to do and to say that we've done this, this, and this. Whether it's in our personal lives or professional lives. And that's just the tendency. It's this need, this drive to accomplish. And that ultimately, creates an accomplished person. However, that makes us, I'll include myself in this category. It makes us very, very vulnerable to losing touch with ourselves and increasing that burnout, that disconnect, that anxiety. And so for me, it's trying to do self-reflecting. When I advise students after they've gone through the interview process and, there's nothing more they can really do to get accepted into a program, whatever program that is, whatever, new job, whatever it is that you've reached that goal. So many people, especially type A, just won't then say, okay, I can relax. I can enjoy. I can go through a day without a to-do list a mile long. You have to become comfortable with the quiet. You have to become uh, comfortable with the what I call the unlist.
Yeah.
And many type A people are not comfortable with that, and they don't realize that's where the soul bucket comes in. The quality time you spend with family, not how many things you did together, how many places you went, how many sightseeing missions you went on, and social media perpetuates that. It's, look what I did this weekend or that weekend. And I think for me, it's pulling away from that runaway train and saying,
Yeah.
just spending quality time, being quiet, being able to enjoy. It sounds, from the checklist mentality, accomplishing nothing, but that's when you accomplish everything. That's where you restore your soul.
Mm.
And I think taking time to recognize where your limits are, where you're bleeding yourself dry, attaining those goals. And once you've reached those goals, there's more goals and more goals. And learning that to be truly successful, you have to refill your soul bucket. You have to be empowered and strong and confident and calm and all those things that are slowly leached from you the more you do, and
Yeah.
away from the things that really matter. That self reflection, that time with loved ones, being able to do the things that you find restore your moral compass, whether it's volunteering, whatever it is.
Exactly.
And so for me, it's those things, learning how to stop saying yes to everything. There was a wonderful guy who did a TED talk,
Yeah.
and the quote is, "Because I said I would."
Yeah. Yeah.
And I actually bought the T-shirt. And it sounds so simplistic, but the reality is, if you are one of those, of course I can do that. Of course I can take that on. Of course I can do more. And then you find yourself conflicted because you can't possibly accomplish that all. So then you are failing. And for a type A person to fail, it's devastating. And learning to limits are what your parameters, what your bandwidth is, so that you have something left to give to the things that are important, not just to everything that comes your way.
Yes, absolutely. And that's one of the key messages that I'm always trying to get across with the work that I'm doing, so that people have that ability, that knowledge, that rest, reflection, self-assessment, and just being in the moment. Is that these are very, very important factors that can really help with the recuperation, as well as just quality time without having to think, oh, I need to check all these things in that checkbox. I'm achieving all of this, but at the end of the day, is that really the best thing to do? Because you're, as you say, you're moving slowly, finally, to a burnt out situation where ultimately it's going to lead you down that road. And are you happy at the end of that? Because you're just constantly chasing your tail. Yeah, I can sympathize with that. There was a very good writer and Dr. James Hewitt, who's written a book called Regenerative Performance, and he talks a lot about having that ability to recharge, to rest, because that will actually make you more productive anyway in the end of the day. So, but yeah, I love what you're saying about that. And that's really revealing that soul bucket. And I've never heard that analogy before until you mentioned it. So you also said something about that feeds in quite well into the next question I'd like to ask you. You alluded to the idea that we're always distracted, this digital age that we're in at the moment. So this is effectively reshaping our physical and our mental health. And really, my question to you is, what worries you most about how people are living today when you take into account this digital age we are now in?
Well, I think that it exactly is that. It is reshaping our brain. Our brain responds and grows and builds synaptic connections based on the stimuli we receive. And if what stimuli we're receiving is truly 2D, it is not multidimensional, then our brains don't seek out that dimensionality because they don't have the capacity or feel the need. And I think then we're building a humanity on what I call plastic expectations. They're completely artificial. The things that used to matter human connection, getting together with friends, going out, in the sunshine, walking in the grass, going to the beach, the things and again, back to that soul bucket, right?
Yeah.
The things that brought us joy and happiness and pleasure, are now reduced, instead of being a whole cornucopia, are reduced down to a thimble-sized, stimulation that appeases us. I don't think it satisfies us, but it appeases us.
Mm.
And people are becoming more and more accustomed to being appeased as opposed to perhaps fulfilled.
Very nice. I love those comparisons as well. That's great. Being appeased as opposed to fulfilled, and or satisfied. And there's a line that you share, and it's such a great line that I've mentioned it to 2 or 3 people since you mentioned it to me when we spoke, and it's fantastic. It's a fabulous line. I aspire to inspire before I expire. Where does that mindset come from, and how does this shape your work and your life? This whole concept. Would you like to repeat it, just so that we've got that into our heads?
I aspire to inspire before I expire.
Perfect.
And for me, that's how I return to what I get gratification out of in life, what life means to me, what being successful means to me. And don't really know where it came from. I was not a kid who really had many heroes. I have more in adulthood, Gandhi and Jane Goodall, and the list could go on and on. But people who have found ways to bring more joy, more compassion, more kindness, um, uh, to the world. And I guess,
Mm.
having a quote unquote servant heart, because that's the scale I place myself upon. Has this brought more good? How can I promote more good? And given the skills I have, worked with a doctor once, who let me bring in my child after hours. This is when we were in England, where you had to go to a particular region to have your health care, and he offered to see my child after hours. We don't like to treat our own family. So I brought him in and I thanked him and thanked him and thanked him. And he said, if I were a baker, I would give you bread. And that was just so profound to me. And that's what I want to do with my life. I want to trigger whatever passion it is, give whatever knowledge I can give that will inspire other people to be kinder or more compassionate, or to bring more healing or joy to the world. So that's my saying, and I'm sticking.
Yeah, no, it's a great saying. I love it. I'm definitely tea leaving that one for sure. You know,
Excellent.
even though I mean, it's such a beautifully succinct way to express it, but for many people, I feel that is at their core, in their soul, their mission to do that as well. Because yeah, no,
Absolutely. And he does sum it up nicely.
yeah, 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 of course, yeah, good. And one of the other things is that obviously, you've worked in clinical settings, education, global health, and even end of life care. So, with all that experience, what has that taught you about what actually matters, and how can busy professionals apply whatever you deem to be important in that field? So, what actually matters?
I think that wherever you are, whatever you're doing, making sure that what you're doing aligns with and synergizes with what you're passionate about. A lot of times when we first graduate from school or start a new position, we're very idealistic. We're very optimistic about what that represents. And then reality sets in and the barriers set in and the difficulties set in. But the mistake I think that people make is they don't recognize those as red flags. They don't look at those as, you know, a time to reflect or reassess and to look at, and again, to bring up that soul bucket, right? What is bleeding you dry as opposed to what is empowering you? When I have a patient, that I took care of 20 years ago that reaches out to me on Facebook and says, you took care of me when I was a baby with diaper rash, and now I've got a child. Yes, I'm giving the awful truth that I'm old as dirt, but at the end of the day, you know, that to me is the strongest affirmation about this ripple effect. That tiny little thing I did,
Yeah.
the way I interacted or engaged or spent time with someone made such a lasting impact. I never would have guessed it would have lasted that long. And that to me is, so affirming of what I have worked so hard for. We work more than we sleep. We work more than we spend time with families. We work so much of our lives that if we can't find that affirmation, I think that it's just incredibly stressful, that mismatch between what we're passionate about and what we're actually doing. And I think if people were to spend more time to understand, to look at those red flags and to analyze them, to circle back. How do I solve this? How do I take care of this mismatch? Do I set limits that I haven't set before? Is is there a way for me to think outside the box? When I talk about patient education, there's never been enough time in my career or probably the history of mankind to be able to do the amount of education that someone that I truly believe, I won't talk about someone, I'll talk about myself, that it truly takes to empower a patient to take the best care of themselves and to buy in to their health span journey. Well,
Yeah.
taking time to reflect on this mismatch and decide, do I need to move on? With me, I solved the problem of never having enough time with patients to see them back more frequently. Most patients were happy to do that because every clinician who cares about making sure their patients are empowered says, I don't have enough time. Well,
Yeah.
many of them are willing to come back again. So can you solve the problem? Do you need to set limits? Do you need to draw your line in the sand that you've gotten sucked further and further down the abyss and now are just struggling to even survive? And so many people don't want to face that. Comfort zones, I can believe, can be more deadly and devastating than any other construct that we force upon ourselves. That comfort zone, which we convince ourselves is alleviating stress and is making our lives easier, is doing anything but. It is wolf in sheep's clothing. And
Yeah.
if we don't address that, we can't we can't change that.
Absolutely. I mean, what you just mentioned about the comfort zone, for example, that's well known that it's always good. The cliche, I guess, would be to get out of your comfort zone, but that cliche holds true because it's all very easy to carry on just doing through the run of things and doing all the things that are easy, the easy options, but then you're not really challenging yourself, so you're never out of that. So you only really grow once you challenge yourself anyway. So even if, I'm not talking about massive challenges, I'm just talking about small things that you can do that may be just changing direction slightly in what you do on a day-to-day basis. It could be something really tiny, sitting on the other side of the sofa. I mean, that's a really crass example, but just doing something that's going to be slightly challenging and then maybe growing on that. But the more interesting point that you mentioned earlier on for me, the ripple effect, doing those small things that could pay dividends later on. I mean, you gave your example that somebody could reach out to you later, and that seems to be the case. That if you do these small things that can be helpful, you might not think it makes any odds at that moment, but later on, maybe we're going into the realms of karma here. Who knows? But that's all positive, isn't it? All of these things. So yeah.
Exactly. Well, other than the saying, my karma ran over my dogma, but Absolutely. I think not only perpetuate the things that damaged you and hurt you, whether it's 3 marriages in or whether, the list is very long, but we can't expect, that saying, which of course I'll mangle, that we expect a different outcome, but we're doing things exactly the same way, and that's true insanity. And ironically, you can accomplish so much outside of yourself that isn't connected with what drives you. And whether you do it as a child, whether you do it as an adult, whether you do it therapy or a spouse or a best friend or alone in a room, taking time to understand, the things that affirm your existence to you.
Wise words. Unfortunately, the recording at some point just petered out, so we missed a tiny bit. I think there's a connection problem, but yeah,
Oh,
on the
so
whole,
sorry.
no, 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 it's fine. Fantastic words there. Listen, Aimee, it's been a lovely conversation. If there's anything else that you'd like to add before we leave, or that you feel that we could have covered, feel free, because we're nowhere near getting up to that hour, but at that point, I feel that for me, we've covered so much in a shorter period of time. So that's been great, and we've had a great chance to shoot the breeze on these topics.
And I can't thank you enough for giving me the opportunity to climb upon my soapbox and, tout some of these things, because the reality is that, you and I are kindred spirits, and that we see people suffering so much from this stress, from this angst, from this repetition of the same things that are potentially unhealthy. We're never going to solve the healthcare crisis and what it's become, you and I, but we can help people survive and be happier within it.
Yeah.
And if you want a last quote going off of what you said about change being inspirational and growth is imperative, that comfort zone is to be avoided at all costs after you lull there for a little while, but not so long that all the negatives you're willing to consume, for its own sake. But here's the last quote of the day then is, if you're not living life on the edge, you're taking up too much room.
Brilliant. Thank you. On that fine note, I shall bid you and the listeners goodbye. Thank you so much, Aimee Lamb, for joining us today on Busy Pro Fast Runner. Thank you, Aimee.
Thank you so much for having me. Take care.
Goodbye.
Bye-bye.
Goodbye. Cheers.